Hello and welcome to a special episode of For Azeroth. I am here with the ever lovely Lex Rants. And Lex, we're here to talk about what everybody always has to deal with, getting good.
Manny, you're already good. That's why you're here to teach me how to get good. You're like top 10 players of all time.
Yeah, right.
I'm sure you've never had to study or work. It just comes naturally to you, right?
Yeah, right. Just roll out of bed. You know what? Despite the fact that these looks are all natural, working at DPS is something that I have to do constantly. You can count this as the 101 class. We don't have Sean here, and I think Sean would be a great person to bring in for like maybe the 201 class. As we've done the basics, Sean comes in and it's like, okay, guys, time for the boot camp. But we're gonna keep it pretty casual, pretty light, just like where to begin. And I guess that's the first question. You're just starting now on this Havoc Demon Hunter. This is your first time raiding, and I guess the first question you would have is like, where do you begin? So tell me a little bit about like your situation with like Havoc and DPSing.
Yeah, so I think one thing that is important to note is that not only is this my first time doing Havoc, and also not only is this my first time doing DPS, this is my first time doing anything other than specifically Holy Priest healing since Legion. Since BFA. I'm a liar. Since BFA, which is when I started raiding seriously. I did a couple like popping into raids on my Hunter back when I was a primarily role player, but it was very like I was doing less DPS than the tank. I was not working on anything. So I went into this kind of with a mindset of like, oh, this is going to be, like I know how to do a rotation. I know how DPS works. This is going to be fine. I'm going to figure it out. And when I pulled everything up, I then kind of swung to the opposite direction where I was like, this is so overwhelming. Like I'm looking at these websites and they're like, here's your opener and it's 20 steps and here's your rotation. And all of them are dependent on like, but if this, then that, then this, then that. And I'm like, how am I supposed to remember all of this? So the first thing I actually did is I kind of took that pressure off myself. And I was like, I am going to kind of I can see a couple of these. I've done like a little read through, so I understand how some of these work together. I'm just going to figure out my keys, right? I'm going to get comfortable with the different buttons I press in my class. And I'm just going to like run some heroics and bop around and just learn. So when I actually study, I know names, right? I know I-beam, I know Fel Rush, I know things like that.
Okay. Yeah. I think that is the common issue, not only just when you're first new to the game or anything like that, but like as you try and look at a new class, like if I were to jump on a fire mage and be like, okay, I'm gonna DPS, it would be much the same. I wouldn't know my opener, I wouldn't know my single target rotation or the rotation if I add in X, Y, and Z talents and so forth. It can be incredibly overwhelming. And I think that's why I wanted to do a 101 class. I wanted to talk about like how you approach learning to be better at doing damage or healing or anything, because there is a lot that you have to take into account. The first thing, of course, is like knowing those resources. So like, yes, you probably jumped onto Wowhead, you'd probably jumped to Icy Veins or any of those things, and you're like, okay, well, what is my rotation? And especially for post Dragonflight, things have changed a lot. It is really dependent on like, hey, which hero talent are you and which sub talents have you picked in your specialization? And is this a single target cleave AoE sort of thing? What I would suggest for players is that know what your focus is if you can have a focus. And if you have multiple things that you are trying to do, you have to prioritize one. It is incredibly difficult to try and learn everything all at once. So you need to make it into a piecemeal thing that you can learn one part and then grow from there. If you are raiding, and this is mostly primarily to build yourself up to raid, my suggestion for you is to learn your single target rotation. that will mean that like, hey, I'm gonna ignore the AoE. I won't be that good at AoE at first. I won't know my opener. Even an opener for single target, I say that is second. Learn your base rotation for single target. That will determine what talents you're going to be picking, because there is like typically one or two sets of talents that are just like, okay, this is what you get for your best single target. And you should be able to figure that out and find that out from looking at your guides, like the ones on Icy Veins or the other sites. So for this purpose, I went to Wowhead. I looked at the Havoc Demon Hunter guide, and of course they've got the different talent builds. They've got the different hero talents. They've got the rotation. The first thing that you would look at, in my opinion, is that you're going to look at your talent builds. Like, how in the world do I actually like build out to become like a DPS guy? And when you look at that, you're going to find out that there is a recommended one for your Felscard. There's going to be a recommended one for your other one, which is the Aldraki. Is that, did I say it right?
Yeah, I think that's how I say it. What I actually say is the other Demon Hunter spec, the
you know
hard
what the
one.
Best thing is? Yeah. You know what the best thing about doing this as an audio format with comments below is that people won't be able to like tell us what the pronunciation is because they can't insert the audio back. So like, I'm going to read somebody's comment being like, it's pronounced, and I'm going to be like, no, that doesn't help. Sorry, friend.
Sorry, it's pronounced ALDR. I can't spell verbally. I don't know why I started doing that. Like, I don't know where in my brain I was like, this is going to work. This is going to go super well.
You use those hyphens. It's like Aldraki, AL-D. Anyways, so you've got, so you do have the two talent builds that are single target based on which hero talents you've selected. If you are not top tier pushing rating, both of these are viable. Mm-hmm. Which one is ahead of the other is a matter of tuning, which people didn't even know before last week because they kept on doing hot fixes. There's still hot fixes going out that are going to be adjusting things next week as well. So pick what you enjoy. You'll find that you stick to it more. So for your purposes, which one did you end up going with again?
Felscard. I'm Felscard till the day I die. Maybe one day I'll try Aldraki Reaver, but I just like read the description and I got so scared. And then I read the description of Felscard and I'm like, oh, meta is strong? I love meta. I know meta. And so I went Metamorphosis, for those of you who don't live and breathe Demon Hunter, which in that case, live and breathe Demon Hunter. What are you doing?
Yeah. So I play a Vengeance Demon Hunter. I also went with Felscard just because I like that entire the flavor of it all and like really having that demon within.
Oh yeah. It's also very fun for the character. Oh god, the thing that they always say in BlizzCon.
Canon?
No, we're moving on. We're moving on.
If you know what word she was trying to say, just put it down in the comments. Okay. Well, when you do that, it will give you talents. All of these sites are really good about being able to import those talents. I like that on top of that, they will give you a little bit of a primer to the talent builds in there. So it'll say that like, hey, the build is not AoE or cleave focused as the Felscard one for the inertia build. And then when you look at the other ones, you can check and see, okay, well, what might work? Because if you're doing, let's say, your Mythic Plus pushed, and you say, oh, this one that I'm learning is very specialized into single target, you might want to look at that other one and say like, okay, this one's more all-rounder, so as I'm learning, this might be the way to go. Mm-hmm.
And
But
Demon Hunter, I will say, is an interesting one for us to teach people about classes with, because Demon Hunter A is very cleave, even in single target. So like you can, I've done a lot of Mythic Pluses when I was teaching myself single target in my single target spec, and my damage wasn't as great as it could have been, but it was fine. And it's also highly choreographed. We don't have any procs. We don't have any 1x. I mean, I guess there's a couple. There's some things that increase, like it's like a 70% chance this is going to come off cooldown or something. But it is very, you press these buttons in this order. When you hit that, you do this cycle, you go through this. So some of this might feel less relevant to those of you who have either like, you know, your single target and your AoE builds are going to be miles apart. And if you have single target into a M+, you're going to get in a lot of trouble because you're not able to do damage realistically. Not a lot of trouble. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Do it anyway. They can suck it up.
Okay. Well, once you've got your talents selected, that allows you to then go in and look at the rotation. As I said at the top, if you look at your opener and try and learn your opener and your regular rotation at the same time, you are going to confuse yourself. You're trying to juggle too many plates at the same time. You'll be like, oh, I need to use that, or was that only in my opener that went ahead of that? My suggestion for everybody, learn your base rotation first. Make that your muscle memory. Yes, in some short lived packs where the opener does a lot, you won't do that well, but in prolonged combat you'll see that, like, hey, your damage is there. And it's about learning your class and getting used to, like, oh, okay, this is how the rotation goes in that. Once you've done that and you've sort of learned it, the next part is continue to practice, because you want to get this to the point where it is no longer like you being like, okay, A, then B, then C, then A, then C, then, and so forth, right? You want it to just become almost muscle memory where you just know what you're doing next. Once you've got it down to that point where you're not really consciously having to remember what key to hit next on your rotation, that's when you start looking at expanding from there. That's when you can go, okay, let me learn my opener. Let me make sure that I know how my utility works. I say both of those together because the opener is a small part of the fight right at the beginning. And so therefore you don't get as much time to practice it, but also typically your opener and how you're using your CC and such don't overlap with each other. They both feed into your main rotation, but they don't seem to overlap with each other that much. And so I don't think that's as bad as juggling plates. You're mostly going to go, okay, what's my opener? Now I'm in my rotation. I already know my rotation. Hey, how do I use my utility? And once you do that, you'll have a full rotation. My suggestion go ahead.
I will say part of this is going to be brain dependent. When I was teaching myself Demon Hunter, I actually went opener then rotation, because the Demon Hunter opener really teaches you those cycles that you have to know how to do, like Immolation Aura, Fell Rush, the I-Beam, Essence Break, the Death Sweep, Annihilation. I forgot words, but I have sticky notes everywhere, so I can remember them. So for me, learning the opener kind of gave me that muscle memory, and then I could go into the full rotation and like be like, oh, I can remember this is the first cycle for my opener. Oh, this is in the middle of my opener. But that is not, A, that's not going to be universally applicable to every class. And B, that's not going to be universally applicable to every person, right? That was the thing that let me work through that. And it sounds like, Manny, that wouldn't have worked for you as much if you were learning Demon Hunter.
I'm wondering how many precasts you do as a Demon Hunter. I doubt you have many. Demon Hunter seems like a lot of, like, it happens fairly instantly. There's no travel time sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's 2.
Right?
You do 2 little things, and then you hunt on pull. So that's true as well. There's not a ton that's going on that's not going to be going on in the fight.
Yeah. A lot of, especially as you move into casters and such, you will have some stuff that's like precast. It's like, hey, cast this, then while that's in the air, cast this, and then when you go into your actual rotation, it's no, go about it the other way. Stuff like a Chaos Bolt from a Warlock, you never want to hard cast that in your rotation. But in your opener, it's like, hey, you have this countdown before the pull. Get that Chaos Bolt in the air, and then as it's in the air, go ahead and do some other stuff. Learning your rotation, or rather, learning your opener, and then trying to be like, oh, I'm gonna cue my Chaos Bolt, but will, I think, fundamentally damage that.
That's fair.
There's also the parts of like, you want to like start up your. You'll have to excuse me because I'm pretty like it's my alt for Demon Hunter, but like when you have the fire that's around you, and I can't remember the name of it.
Immolation Aura.
Immolation Aura. Thank you.
I got you.
When you have your Immolation Aura, that actually works into other abilities.
Mm-hmm.
But in an opener, you may be like, okay, I'm using it to just empower, but in the rotation, it's like, hey, you want everybody around you, so you get that ticking going as fast as possible. So there are things that will, because the conditions are so different in an opener, it will cause you to do things in the wrong order in your rotation, and your rotation you will practice more just because it is the meat and potatoes of your class. So even if I'm glad that you're able to learn stuff from that opener that fed into your rotation. I don't know if the same would have been true going backwards.
That's
right.
And to be fair, I'm lying a little bit because I'm realizing as we're speaking that I did have that chunk of time that I'd like skimmed Wowhead and then before I trained. So it's not like I was going in cold, right? Like I had a sense of sort of what in general I was supposed to do and kind of how things work together. That I'd been training actually for like a couple weeks at that point. Before I started training anything. So I guess I did a little bit of the rotation, then opener.
Okay, cool. So like now we've talked about like the core, we've talked about your opener, utility being a thing. As a raider, utility is less important. Utility really is fight dependent, and mostly it's going to be opener and your core. A big issue that I find that people will have with their rotation is that they won't use their cooldowns. They'll be forever holding their cooldowns. You hold your cooldowns if you are a healer. If you are a DPS, do not hold cooldowns unless you know that the fight's about to drop and you're going to pull into the next thing very quickly. This is more an issue with Mythic Plus. Far less an issue with Raid. In Raid, when you're on a boss, you may as well full send if your damage on the next trash pull is hurt because you decided to really put out in that last 5 seconds of the previous boss. Nobody is going to care. So I would say cooldowns, making sure that you are free sending them for the most part. When you get those down, you might end up starting to hold cooldowns for specific damage windows, but that is very fight dependent.
The other thing, I think you were actually the one who told me this, Manny, as somebody who was a raider and then moved into Mythic Plus, I had in my head, bosses are these like big, horrible, super powerful things that I need to hold everything for. Trash is silly Billy. You're talking, you're chatting, you're drinking your wine, you're bopping around with your friends, you're running around. Somebody's probably off, repairing in the main city, which is not how it works in Mythic Plus. And so it is actually beneficial to use cooldowns on trash because trash is part of percent and it's also part of the timer. So you want to burn through that as quickly as possible, which I'm sure all the Mythic Plus players are listening to me and they're like, yes, of course. What's happening? But as a raider, that was really like weird. Like, why would I be using cooldowns on trash when a boss is right there and I know you're going to pull it without, resetting or anything?
Yeah, for sure. I would say that even when you're doing raiding, like if you've got cooldowns and you've got like 2 more trash packs before the boss and like they're like 2-minute cooldowns or like 1-minute cooldowns, just full send. Like let's say it's the trash right before you pull the boss. Yeah, any minute cooldown, 30-second cooldown, why aren't you using it? Burn it down. At worst, the team's going to be waiting 20 seconds for that 30-second cooldown to come back. It's like, guys, let's just eat the feast for a second before we pull, because poor Manny died over there because he pulled aggro because he popped his cooldowns. What in the world was he thinking?
It's prime PowerPoint time for Luke in our guild.
There you go. Or people who are sitting down and watching the videos before the poll. It's like, yeah, my cooldowns are going to come back as we're watching the 2-3 minute video.
Frankly, it's a kindness. It's a kindness to the rest of your team if you use your cooldowns right before the boss, because then you have more time to talk through the boss. Raiders use cooldowns right before pulling the boss.
Let's maybe not go that far, but sure. So then once you were getting your basic rotation down and your opener and that sort of stuff, that's learning the core of your character. That means that you can now take that and move it into different things. You can do your delves, you can do your mythic plus. As you are looking at the different stuff, including, hey, this is an AoE fight or a cleave fight and stuff, that's when you're going to start looking at your different builds. This will give you a more full understanding, but you'll have the core of what you were doing from your initial part. You're just building on what you had before. Now, I would suggest, if you are very new to the class or very new to the role, that you try and keep things as familiar as possible. A big thing that helps me is that I have particular binds always to the same buttons, so it doesn't matter what class, spec, or role I'm in. My interrupt is always at the same button. My movement is always at the same button. It helps me not have to think about like, oh, what button do I have to press? That can help the transition into new specs or new roles or new classes and as well. Obviously, that's not always the case. Not every class is going to have the same amount of movement abilities or even an interrupt in some cases, but it should help you a bit. When you were learning, Lex, what did you find the easiest or the hardest about like learning your spec?
So interesting. So I think the easiest thing for me was figuring out, I like patterns, which is I think one reason that I really like Demon Hunter. I talk about liking the new, but really a lot of it is because it's very structured patterns. And so for me, learning those cycles was by far, like it wasn't, I mean, that's the core of the gameplay, so I'm still working on it, but that was the easiest thing for me to kind of grasp, right? Like, oh, these things are going to work together if I cast them in one specific order. I don't think that's what you meant to be asking. For me, overwhelmingly, the hardest part of learning was just accepting that I was going to have to be publicly bad for a while, right? I was going to have to go into Mythic Plus and I was not going to know things and I was not going to know mechanics well enough and I was not going to understand my class and I was going to make mistakes. I was going to go into raid and my numbers were not going to be very good. And I, again, was not going to understand, you know, like when people are saying, like calling for interrupts, I didn't have that in muscle memory and stuff. And there was no other option. I could spend hours at training dummies. I could do as much reading as my heart desired, and I was still going to have to be publicly bad to get it into my system and get it into my hand and get it ready to go. And we're figuring it out. We're getting through it, but that to this day is still one of the hardest things. Like when I look at my DPS meters and I'm like, you know, lower than I should be for this dungeon, and I'm like, ooh, I'm being publicly bad.
Yeah, it's we all have to start somewhere. It's very rare that you have like the absolute savant that just comes in and it's like all the numbers just flow and they just do it all. There's always going to be somebody better. I'm gonna like step into a team and it's like, oh, this is my first time in a mythic raid team, and it's gonna be like, oh wow, I did not know numbers could get that high, sort of thing. That is definitely a big intimidating thing for a lot of players, like the majority of players, especially if you are stepping in with new people who you are worried that might not be as forgiving. Like, it's one thing to be like, okay guys, I'm going to bring my alt that I've never played to like the team that you've been raiding with all the time and everybody understands what's about to happen. It's another thing to step into a Mythic Plus and be like, I'm not doing well, and I hope these guys aren't going to start saying something. So I would agree that that's a big thing.
Yeah, and I think I will say, if you can handle it, and this is really hard, I get this, and I like there have been times in my life that I just like couldn't even deal with it, and I didn't pug at all, which was what I needed in that moment. I do think that there was a big benefit to me of pulling the Band-Aid off and spending a lot of time in Mythic Plus pugs. It has been hard and I've gotten yelled at quite a bit, but that has made me better than I would have been if I was only playing with my friends, because my friends are going to adjust to me in a way that a pug won't. Right. So I've learned things about my play style and about my class. For example, I just recently, within the last couple of days, realized that I have a really bad problem pulling aggro off of tanks because I have really high burst as a demon hunter. And I see the tank pulled. I'm like, oh, great. And I meta right in the middle of it. And I do a ton of burst damage before they've had a chance to collect ads. And then I pull a lot of aggro. Which if I was playing with my friends, they would be like, okay, it's Lex. She, I know that she does really high burst, so I'm going to make sure that I'm getting all of my cooldowns and stuff off to pull aggro really quickly. They would know how to kind of make that work around me. No tank in an M plus is going to change their play style significantly because one of their people likes to meta the second that they pull. Or a lot of them
I will fight you on it. I will fight you on that.
Some might. And I've also had some really great tanks who have very clearly seen, like, Demon Hunter uses a lot of movement on their in part of their rotation. And I've started to notice that the better tanks do have a tendency to notice that I'm moving a lot and pull a lot cleaner and pull wider areas. So some will, and good tanks should, but a lot won't. And that's going to teach you how to manage and how to react to yourself. Those tanks also had to be bad in public, right? They also had to go into groups and learn that sometimes demon hunters run every 2 minutes into a different group, and all of a sudden they have 5 groups because they were trying to do a straight line, and the demon hunter doesn't know how to run in a straight line, right? And they had to wipe a ton. Like, tanks also go through the same thing. So learning to be flexible and learning how to manage the people around you is a really big skill, and it's one you're really going to learn in groups of random people that you can't talk to easily.
Yeah. I think there's 2 ways to handle it. One is that there are a number of communities in the World of Warcraft space that are set up for people who are improving, who are new to stuff. I am part of the Dungeon Dojo. It's a community that does teaching raids, groups that do Mythic Plus and Delves, right? All the PvE content where you can find people who are at that level or wanting to mentor people at that level. I think that is a big thing about getting past that wall. If you are going to dive head first into it, the other part of it is communicating.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, that, like, hey, I burst a lot, or I will have a lot of movement, and that can cause, like, let's say a butt pool or something like that. The very next dungeon you go and say, like, tank, pull it back as I dash around. I don't want a butt pull. Mm-hmm. Hey, tank, make sure you've got the aggro at the beginning. I do a big amount of burst. Just that alone, just a little bit of proactive communication will change a lot of those tanks that don't change their behavior. Will then be like, oh, okay, like, hey, yes, because your success is their success, right? That's something that's quickly glazed over in Mythic Plus and stuff, because we're always talking about the doom and the gloom, the leavers, the rage quitters, and so forth. But they went into that group. They want to get that key done. So just at the beginning, I play Enhancement Shaman. I've got a couple of procs that could do some heavy, huge damage, right? And I will say, like, hey, tank, big damn incoming, right? And then the tank knows if I die because I pulled aggro, right? The tank can't get angry at me, like, whoa, you pulled the aggro. It's like, I warned you, buddy, right? Like, now it's not my issue, right? If he calls back and says, well, dude, no, I don't have the cooldowns, then it's my issue again. But that's communication back and forth and proactive. You could also be like, okay, I know I'm gonna pop meta, I'm gonna pull aggro, so what I'm also going to do is use a defensive at the before I pop. So as soon as I grab that aggro, the tank's got a little bit more time to pull it back, right? And making that adjustment that is specific to you is a huge help to yourself and the group performance.
I also have found, just in general, I don't know if this is scientific or if it's just the people who respond to me would have responded anyway, that if you're just like, if you open up being a little chatty in Mythic Plus and friendly, people tend to be nicer back. I think it's very easy to kind of accidentally dehumanize the people you're running with. Like, you're just, you're powering through. You've seen different names every time. You just want to get through the key. You're moving, you're moving, you're moving. And so when we do little things to kind of remind each other, like this is a group of people playing a silly little video game for fun together, people will often be a lot more forgiving and a lot more patient and a lot more, even just like nice and funny and chattery back. Because it's like, oh, right, true. It is annoying that this key is probably going to die, but we're going to get gear and it happens, whatever. I'll get another key afterwards.
Yeah, for sure. Like there is always more content out there to do. So don't stress too much. That said, now we're at the point where you're in keys. You're trying to do some stuff. You've learned, hopefully, your single target and your AoE builds and the openers for that. You've started learning all of your utility, so you're a fairly productive player, but hey, your numbers aren't quite there. You're like able to do something, but you're not doing it at the level you want to. So now the big part is like, how do we get good? How do we improve? How do we like to like get ourselves from like, yeah, all right, to like, top in the meters, the where we want to be. And the answer to that is team with people worse than you. No. The actual answer is that you're going to look at some resources. Everybody is going to need to learn stuff, and the biggest part is like, where do I learn? Class discords are a nice one-stop place, but sometimes people get very worried about going into the class discord. I'm going to get you to skip a step. Eventually, you're going to go into a class discord, maybe. You're going to ask the question, maybe. And half the time, the answer is going to be sim yourself. The reason that is because while there are these great best in slot lists, and there are the answer for if you are doing everything else perfectly and have everything else set up for you, the truth of the matter is, most of the time you are learning, not everything else is working perfectly for you. You look at that best in slot list, and that best in slot list is dependent, like the best trinket might be dependent on you having 9 other pieces that mean that trinket gives you what you're lacking because the 9 other pieces were going somewhere else. This is very true when we get to later seasons and we're getting a lot of secondaries. Secondaries have breakpoints and fall offs and synergies with each other. So like how, even if nothing changes throughout the entire expansion, which is a big if, right? At the end of the expansion, how much stats you're getting and how much that means other stats are valued is going to change dramatically. This means that like where in first season you might be just chasing 2 stats, in the last season you might get enough of those 2 stats that the other 2 stats are now more bang for their buck. I'm not going to teach you how to like weigh those stats. That is a big advanced thing that I don't think I would actually do in an episode. But what I will do is tell you how you can get the answer. And that is simply 2 sites. Raidbots and Ask Mr. Robot. They will take the information from your character, crunch the numbers for you, and then be able to tell you things like, what is your best stat? What is your worst stat? And everything in between. They will also be able to tell you which bosses, like let's say you're about to go for a raid night and you're like, oh, I really want this upgrade because it's my best in slot. It's like, yeah, but is that the best for you right now? Which boss should you really be looking at and being like, I want it from that boss? And Ask Mr. Robot and Raidbots have that. Raidbots has that as a drop-tomizer. Raidbots can help you choose the best thing out of your vault for you right now using their top gear. And I think that these are really good. If you run a quick simulation to figure out what your stats are, I want to put this disclaimer out. This the stat weights that you will get is based on your current gear without you losing anything. Okay? If you decide to switch your chess piece for this great chess piece that has your best stats on, you've lost the stats from the chess piece that you took off, right? And so straight stats are very tricky, right? That's why I suggest avoid doing the quick sim. Look at doing a sim to look at your top gear, to look at your drop optimizer, to see where you're. Another thing that you might look at, of course, because we just looked at the guide from either Wowhead, it was the one we were just talking about, but all of the guides, including ones that you'll find on all these sites, have it. So Icy Veins, best in slot list. That list is, again, based on you having all the other pieces, but also based on you having access to everything. If you are a person who hates delves and never goes into delves, or doesn't touch Mythic Plus, or never raids, a lot of those pieces are suddenly unavailable to you. If you raid with a team and you raid normal, but you push and you get your KSM, your Mythic Plus gear is going to be at a fundamentally higher item level that you have access to than your raid gear, and that's going to change it. So best in slot lists, you have to take with a big grain of salt unless you are full clearing Mythic raiding, full clearing the highest keys, getting through and doing all of those 8s, which is, I know a lot of people are able to do the 8s, but there are people who might be having difficulties with it, especially with the changes that they've made over the course of the initial part of the War Within. That's why Blood Mallet is such a good tool on top of being able to sim yourself. Bloodmallet.com has the values for every different trinket for every different class. It also will give you stat weights and will show you how those stats are intertwined. This is a good thing to look at a glance, but because it gives you a breakdown by item level, you can also just quickly say like, oh, my best in slot trinket that I'm looking at is actually only item level 600, and this other one, which is the second best, or let's say the third best, because you have the best 2, but now you're looking at this one, it's like, oh, this is only the third best, and it's a 619 trinket. Well, is that good? How does that compare? And you could run the sim, you definitely could, or you could just quickly take a look at the glance at this and say like, oh, even at item level 600, my best in slot trinket beats a 619 version of my third best in slot trinket. And in fact, this trinket would need to be 626 in order to beat the level 600. And that's amazing to just quickly glance at that and be like, wow, this trinket really kicks butt.
This is very interesting because I have Blood Mallet up right now, and one thing I'm learning is I thought I knew how Demon Hunter worked and what would benefit Demon Hunter. I have been incorrect on just about every single trinket choice that I've made recently. I remember, apparently the best one for me is the Treacherous Transmitter. I remember when that dropped in Raid and everyone was like rolling on it. I'm like, well, I can't do that because that's going to be so much movement. That's going to waste so much time. No, absolutely not. I'm not doing that. That's too complicated. We're not dealing with that. Primary stat, who cares? Apparently me, because it's by far my best in slot trinket. So my bad. So yeah, you can, I really thought I knew how all of this played together. I did not.
Be careful, because you need to look at, one, what's available to you, two, what kind of fight it is, because you will see stuff change drastically if you switch between like single target to like a 5 target. Now, in this case, the Treacherous Transmitter, sorry, Lex, is good all around. It is ridiculous. In fact, I think, let me just click on it here. If I switch over to Casting Patchwork 5 targets, yeah, it's even further ahead. You will see
I was a really good raid leader, and I generously sacrificed it up for the group as a whole, is what I did.
Yes, there you go. There you go. You will see though when you make that switch around that your second and third drastically change. So when you are looking at like, oh, what am I using for single target versus what I'm using for like AoE and big pulls, that does change. The trinket that is in 7th place in single target jumps to 2nd place in the AoE. So like that is definitely something to consider. It might be like when you get to that like that level that you start switching around your item loadouts, which people do. But this is helpful in a lot of ways because you can look at not just your trinkets but your consumables like the vials, the potions and such, and see like how much power there is in like the alchemical chaos is really good for you. Again, for single target versus AoE, you might find out that it's not as good in other situations. You can check out your potions, be like, man, I really do want to get the tempered potion in AoE and in single target. This can help you in a lot of ways, and because this is based on sim data, you're not waiting for an author to be like, okay, I've got to go update this guide and stuff. This can be like a really good quick glance as they keep up the simulation data. Okay, remember I talked about your particular situation. Blood Mallet does have the ability for you to log in and try and pull some of the information yourself. That said, if you are to go to raid bots and I think ask Mr. Robot as well, you can pull that information as well. Blood Mallet I like because it's so quick to just quickly glance and be like, okay, generally this is really good for me. This is what I want. Weapon enchants and so forth. This is how this performs and such. I really like, especially early in an expansion, to look at things like the raid enchants, because it might be that you're like looking at it and being like, man, do I really want that rank 3 of this, or do I really want this rank 2 of that? And you might be like, okay, you know what? I can afford rank 2, but then when I look at this, the rank 2 of the best one is actually outperformed by the rank 2 of the second best one. As soon as I look at that, I would go back to the guide and I would look to see like, okay, is this something where I should only have one of these enchanted on and not put them on both weapons? There are stuff that like, yes, your offhand it's good with this enchant and your main hand's good with this enchant or whatever. Those are things that you need to look at. So do keep referencing back on these things, but at least this way you don't have to memorize it. It's just like oh cool, I got an upgrade, let me just double check that. Remember that the first part of this was getting your rotation, learning your class, and that is the immediate thing that you could do to improve, right? And it's going to stick with you longer because gear will come and go, upgrades will come and go. A hot fix might change relative scaling and such, but if you know your class and such, that's going to carry you through the most part. Do you have any questions about this so far?
Oh man, I don't think so. I'm sure this is gonna be the type of thing where like once I dig into everything and actually start simming myself, I'm gonna lose my mind again, which would be a perfect opportunity for us to do a 201.
Yeah.
But I will say, as somebody who has not looked at Sims before, I am looking at this and it's exciting and interesting, and it's also a little overwhelming. Which I think is just kind of how it is, right? Like I'm gonna have to go through this. I'm gonna have to get used to clicking through things. I'm gonna have to get used to the different options, see how like the drop optimizer works, see how simming different pieces of gear works, like play around with it. But I just wanted to validate those of you who are in the same place as me and looking at this for the first time. It's a little crazy. It's gonna be okay. We're gonna get through it together. Tweet at me. We'll be fine. We'll do it together.
Yeah, definitely. So at this point, I would want to leave you with just this. The reason that I even went this far is because, Lex, you have been working on the fundamentals already. This is just the next step based on like the kind of conversation we had. Off stream, off the channel, we're going to go through each of these, but I'm going to make sure that I put in at least a link to a guide that I like for each of these resources. Except for the guide. The guide sort of needs to explain itself, or it's just not really a guide.
A guide to the guide.
You know what? Wowhead does have guides to guides. It's getting ridiculous.
Oh, yeah.
Anyways, we're going to go through this. Let me know what your questions are, and we'll try and cover it in a 201 episode. But right now, we're going to go through a little bit of the nitty gritty for Lex, which is less generally applicable for everybody else.
Unless you play the best class.
All right. Well, we will call it here. Until next time, guys, make sure you join the Faz Discord. If you have any questions, I'm willing to help, or at least point you in the right direction. And of course, that's where you can find us and all the stuff that we do. Until later, rather. May all your hits be crits.